What's up everyone, my name's Mark Hawk, and today we're doing a quick side-by-side with the new Polaroid Cube Plus that was released in late 2015 up against the Polaroid Cube from late 2014. Now we're going to put these cameras through a variety of tests. You can use any of these quick links to jump to the section you're most interested in. Otherwise, sit back and we'll start playing them all. And if any of this footage seems familiar to you, we've done a few comparisons on the same rig, so a lot of the footage might be similar to other comparisons with different cameras. So, with that out of the way, let's get to it. Now we're going to start off by taking a look at both of these cameras running 1080p 30 frames a second. Now the cube on the right side of your screen can only produce results up to 30 frames a second, so even if we drop it down to 720p, there's not going to be any noticeable benefit in any way, so we're going to keep it at 1080p 30 throughout this video. The Cube Plus on the left side of your screen, however, can do up to 60 frames a second at 1080p and 720, and it also has built-in stabilization. Both of these cameras do have a smaller field of view than traditional action cameras. Instead of being 170 degrees, we're limited to 124 degrees, but that's going to help us eliminate some of the lens distortion we'll normally see on the left and right side of our screen. Now you notice both of these cameras have a much different color temperature, but the one thing I really want to focus on is sort of white and black values. Now the Cube Plus on the left side of your screen definitely has a bigger range in white and black values, and you can tell this just by looking at the lamppost in the center of each frame. So as the lamppost goes over the bright white sky, it has different levels of white shades. That way you can actually see a more defined edge, and we don't lose the light post when it goes over that bright value. If you look at the cube on the right side of your screen, those values are pretty much clipping all at the same color. Basically, instead of having like 25 different shades of white to pick from, we only have like 2 or 3, and that's why the light post on the right side of your screen is basically becoming invisible, while the Cube Plus on the left side of your screen retains a lot of that information just because it doesn't have to clip it out of existence. It actually has values for what it's picking up, so that's something we're going to have to look for as we go through this video. So beyond just looking at things like color differences, we want to focus on clarity and sharpness and just what information is being picked up between these cameras that the other ones maybe not. Take a look at various shades of the same color. So if we look in the center of the screen here, everything is sort of this same sort of warmy, mushy green. And a lot of that information on the cube on the right side of your screen is just getting lost, and you're going to see on both cameras this weird sort of pulsing effect where things get sharp and then there's a pulse where it's really blurry. This happens a lot when we have information that's basically the same sort of shades of color. Now obviously you can see on the right side of your screen some of the bushes actually retain some of their detail, but for the vast majority of the scene it's a very muddy mess. The same could be similar for the Cube Plus on the left side of the screen. I'm hoping in a firmware update this will get addressed, but the Cube on the right side of your screen has been out for a year. I kind of don't really have any assumptions that it's going to be improved, but I'm hoping this sort of pulsing and mushiness on the left will go away in time, but as of right now, I can't really say one way or another. But you know, you can check out our Polaroid Cube Plus review in the coming weeks. I'm actually waiting for a post-launch firmware, which is supposed to help address a few things, so we'll take a look at it when that comes out. And both of these cameras do have a very nice rich saturation color, and we are crunching down the values a little bit. You can see in the window in the lower right of each screen, we have just nice rich black windows. There's a little bit of a like chromatic aberration. Like basically our edges don't seem super sharp. There's a little bit of dancing noise in the edges. Chromatic aberration is when, if you think of like red, green, and blue channels all lying on top of each other, if one of those is off for some reason, if they're filming and like the edge can't tell if it's like blue or red, and it kind of is doing some wonky things, we'll have these weird sort of harsh outlines on solid objects. So you might see like a blue edge or a yellow edge or something like that. So just be on the lookout for that as well. Now, looking at the Polaroid Cube on the left side of your screen, you're going to notice a lot of the edges have a lot of weird dancing grain. It almost looks very kind of icky or motiony, almost as if there's sort of like a heat distortion there. And on the Polaroid Cube on the right side of your screen, everything feels a little bit soft. It's almost if we're doing like a degrain or we're denoising the plate. Everything just feels unnaturally soft, but compare that to the left side of your screen where all of the edges just look very muddy and mushy. And it's really the differences between a $100 camera and a $150 camera. But the areas that I think are a little more important, that are a little more concerning, is again with those different shades of color. Now with the Cube Plus, again, we have that wider range of colors, but we still have that sort of pulsing and popping that we were seeing earlier. And that's the area that kind of concerns me, because it'll ruin what could otherwise be a really good shot, because our grain is pulsing, or we have some weird sort of compression issues. And if you're looking at things on a computer screen, you know, a lot of these issues might just sort of fade into the background and go unnoticed, but if you're looking at these on like a big giant LCD television, all those problems are just going to be more amplified. So that's what really concerns me about both of these cameras. Again, I don't really see a lot of those issues being improved in the Cube Plus from what you see here. The Cube, but hopefully the Cube Plus will get a later firmware update to address some of that sort of pulsing noise. So So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to switch on the Cube Plus between 30 frames a second and 60 frames a second. Now there's not a huge quality difference. You really have to know what you're looking for in order to see the difference, and I really, it's so minor in a way that I really don't think it deters from anything. But take a look at some of the red poles, specifically near the ground. You're going to notice when we switch to 60 frames a second on the left side of your screen, our edges just get a little more anti-alias. And if you're not familiar with that, that's sort of steppiness. Instead of having a straight, smooth line, it sort of goes out a little bit, then cuts to the left, goes up a little bit, cuts to the left. When we're filming at 60 frames a second, that's a little more noticeable, but not really enough to really deter you from some of the benefits of 60 frames a second. Now what that's going to get us is it's going to be really smooth, so we're not going to have a lot of motion blur. If we wanted to slow down that footage later, we can do 50% and still keep a really smooth image going at 30 frames a second instead of it being really choppy at 15 frames a second as if we filmed with 30 frames a second. Now, look in the upper left here at the sort of gazebo green thing. On the Cube Plus, we can actually make out that there is a logo on there. That's completely lost in the Polaroid Cube. Here we're going to be dealing with a lot of fine detail, and we're also going to be sort of swapping between a really contrasty sort of light source and a really flat light source. Like what's on your screen right now at 60 frames a second is a really flat light source that's similar to like a cloudy day. So if you're filming on a mountain and you're snowboarding and there's a lot of clouds, it's going to be very similar to these results, as opposed to the contrasty result, which is similar to sort of like golden hour, when we have a lot of nice, interesting shadows, which can make a really interesting composition. And as we switch between 30 and 60 frames a second, take notice of on the left side of your screen, things like the flower edges. Like as we go from 60 to 30, you'll notice the edges just sort of get a little not as sharp, or they have like kind of a weird black line around them. Again, that's some of the anti-aliasing stuff we were talking about earlier, and the Polaroid Cube continues to just be very soft. There's never really super sharp edges like we're seeing on the Polaroid Cube, but we also don't see a lot of that dancing noise or those sort of like, for lack of a better word, those icky lines we were seeing earlier. Now, the Polaroid Cube is capable of filming at 1440p. Now, 1440p remains the same width at 1920, but allows us to have more field of view at the top and bottom of our frame. Now, this is really helpful if you're filming on something like a trail, like if you're doing mountain biking, and you want to capture everything from the bottom of your screen, from the bottom of the trail all the way up to the sky, or if you're in a tight environment, like let's say a helicopter cockpit or inside a car. Having it at 1440p allows us to have that extra field of view, and then if later on, if we're editing a video at 1920 by 1080, we can sort of shift the frame up or down. That way we can kind of make sure we get what we want captured in frame at all times. It's a really good security blanket when we're filming these scenarios where we want to make sure we really get the shot. And similar to 60 frames a second, there is a slight quality difference, but really not enough to deter you from using 1440p. In fact, I would encourage you to film at 1440p unless you really wanted to get 60 frames a second. So 1440p is limited to 30 frames a second. 1080p 60 frames a second should be used when you're trying to capture things you want in slow motion, or if you're kind of going for that documentary look and you don't want a lot of motion blur. Both of these cameras are running off a lot of auto features. There's no way to really sort of lock in things like white balance, but the Polaroid Cube Plus does have the ability to connect to a smartphone via Wi-Fi, so you can change all the settings on the go. The Polaroid Cube is limited to having just a switch on the back that allows you to go from 1080p to 720p, but again, there's no real reason to switch over to 720p. But you can see, like, as we went from above the water to below the water, the Polaroid Cube on the right side of your screen is much more sensitive to changing its settings to its surroundings, so it bumped up that saturation quite a bit, while the Polaroid Cube sort of took in the environment a little bit better. It's balancing off the colors a little bit. It's introducing a little more red, that way things stay a little more balanced, but again, it is quite saturated, but it's not a very unappealing picture. The Cube and Cube Plus aren't waterproof right out of the box. They can take a little bit of splashing, but you really need the extra waterproof housing in order to go underwater. And trust me, found that out the hard way. They will not go underwater without being completely destroyed. So you're going to have to spend about $25 if you're going to want to take these cameras underwater. And again, you saw how that camera changed all of its settings as soon as it came out from under in the water. Now we have this amazing sort of low light condition. It's completely golden hour, and this shot kind of shows you why. Now both of these cameras are a little warmer. They're not so much natural to the actual environment. Those oranges you see in the background are way brighter than anything you'd sort of see in reality. Parts of my car here come off pink on the Polaroid Cube Plus, but as we're moving here, keep in mind that the Polaroid Cube Plus does have stabilization, and we're not seeing any sort of weird warpiness. So we're basically removing a lot of those 40 to 30% jitters that kind of otherwise would ruin normal hand motion shots. We're just helping keep everything a little bit smoother. It's not a huge improvement over just traditional handheld footage, but it's a little bit enough that doesn't distort your footage. Alright, the Polaroid Cube Plus and the GoPro Hero session are recording at 1440p 30 frames a second, while the Polaroid Cube here is recording at 1080p 30 frames a second. Alright, the Polaroid Cube Plus and the GoPro Hero session are recording at 1440p 30 frames a second, while the Polaroid Cube here is recording at 1080p 30 frames a second. While we're going over the audio quality of both of those cameras, take a look at things like the sky when I was talking in those last two shots. Notice how those compression artifacts that we were talking about earlier sort of come through and add a lot of really crappy quality to the shot, just with having me in the shot and then going out of the shot. Everything kind of looks like it's okay. And also look at things like the softness quality again. Look at that bush on the left, just the amount of detail on the Polaroid Cube, but then some of the edges look kind of weird when the cars go by underneath it on the Polaroid Cube. So for both of those cameras, the Polaroid Cube Plus, that's the one area I've been told we're going to see a quality bump when we have the firmware update that comes out post-launch. So if you did pick up the Cube Plus, make sure you do the firmware update, and you should see an improvement in the audio quality, but I can't really say to it at all because that patch is not out yet. Now with the Polaroid Cube, again, we had very scratchy audio, similar to the Polaroid Cube Plus, but it was just a little bit louder. They were both kind of poor in sort of quality standards. Not really much else to say about it. Color profile here, we're looking at, like, again, we have a little more detail in the Cube Plus, but we have really nice, rich warms. Take a look at the orange building on the lows in the back left here. We definitely have a more detail in the Cube Plus in terms of, like, things aren't getting blown out, but things are a little more balanced on the Cube Plus. Our saturation isn't as extreme, but that might be because we're looking at a giant red car, so the Cube might be, it being a little more sensitive to what's right in front of it, maybe like what's in the center of the screen, isn't exaggerating those reds nearly as much, while the Polaroid Cube Plus is kind of taking the entire plate into consideration before it does its color correction, which is why here on the left side of your screen we have a little more contrast. Our sort of blacks are lifted up. It's compensating a little bit by adding green a little more. So these cameras are just really sensitive as to what they're looking at. I would just say the Cube Plus takes its entire environment into consideration more, and the Cube basically takes what's more in the center of the screen into consideration. That might not be exactly how it's working, but it's sort of the way I'm translating what I'm seeing in terms of results. Because right now on the left side of your screen, it's a little more red for some reason, and I'm assuming it's taking the overall environment, seeing that there's not a lot of red, and it's sort of pumping that up a little bit, while the Cube is sort of saying fairly balanced, and it's just taking what's in the center of the screen and not really color shifting it in any sort of way. It doesn't really see a lot of red, so it doesn't really adjust for it. It doesn't see a lot of blue, it doesn't really adjust for it. But here, you know, again, it's taking the overall environment, it sees that it's bright, so it's crunching it down on the Cube Plus, and that's why we have a lot of blacks. The Cube is taking more a look in the center of the screen where we don't really have the bright sun, and it's just sort of leaving everything more neutral. It's not going either up or down in any direction. It's also a really good shot to see if anything was happening really weird with our depth of field, because we have one straight line that goes basically all the way into the distance without any weird issues. Now the Cube Plus is definitely compensating for the lack of low light here. You can see that in the grain. It's just bumping that ISO up super high, so we get a lot of dancing grain, and that grain is huge, and it looks like a lot of compression artifacts. You can definitely see that in the upper left sky near the CNN building on the left. That's that little red light in the upper left, while the Cube basically just keeps everything sort of neutral. It keeps its ISO a little bit lower. Again, this is really a preference. I think they're both fairly poor, but they're both very small image sensors having to deal with low light, which is very tough for action cameras. Now both of these cameras can do still photography. There's a few settings and it's really easy. It's a one button press if you want to take photos. The Cube Plus has the benefit of accessing again through Wi-Fi into your phone. The Cube is shooting at a resolution of 3264 by 2448 on a 6 megapixel image sensor. The Cube is using a 6 megapixel image sensor on the right side, but it's using a 16 by 9 format image, which is 3328 by 1872. So really the big benefit with the Cube Plus is we're getting more field of view. We have all of those color and sort of quality differences really being applied to here. I do think the photo quality is a little bit better, but again, when we are taking photos in low light, instead of keeping the shutter open longer, it's just sort of bumping up that ISO, and maybe it's keeping up the keeping the image open a little longer, but you can see a lot of those noise artifacts in both of these images. Now you could download and look at all of the raw images yourself using the link in the more information section below this video. And if you found this video outside of our YouTube channel, head on over to markhawkcam.com or YouTube channel Markhawkcam to find that link. Anyway, before you go, if you found this video useful, be sure to press that like and share button at the bottom of your screen. It helps me out immensely, helps me bump up in the search results, and gets this video out to a lot more people. Also want to note that the Polaroid Cube Plus was provided as a review unit for this video. And yeah, if you're feeling super generous, head on over to my Patreon page where you can throw a few dollars my way, either one time or monthly, and that helps keeps Markhawk Cam funded, because a lot of what you see here is out of pocket. Even though we did get the review unit for this video, it was just super helpful to get more videos done. Anyway, if not, just be sure to press that like and share button. Don't need any money, it just helps me out a lot. I'm Markhawk, and I'll see you all out there. Have a good one, everyone.